But first, and before I get to some very good news on the coronavirus, at least for some Australians, about memory. Memories of Captain James Cook. Today, in the Socialist Republic of Victoria, the state with the most extreme coronavirus laws, one of the women advising that government, Deputy Chief Health Officer Annaliese van Diemen, has taken time out from her busy duties dealing with this crisis to tweet about James Cook, the great British explorer who landed on Botany Bay, Sydney, 250 years ago yesterday. She tweeted, "Sudden arrival of an invader from another land, decimating populations, creating terror, forces the population to make enormous sacrifices and completely change how they live in order to survive. COVID-19 or Cook 1770. Unbelievable." In fact, there are two extraordinary things about that analogy. First, that the Deputy Chief Health Officer of Victoria actually thinks that the coronavirus is decimating our population. In fact, it has killed just 90 Australians over 2 months, half of them aged 80 or older, many already sick. 90 is not good, but the word decimating is hysterical and says plenty about the mindset of medical advisors in Victoria, the state with the most extreme and pointless bans.
It is frustrating, but I don't need to play golf. No one needs to play golf. I might want to, but me playing golf simply isn't worth someone's life.
Let's look at the other side of Van Diemen's analogy, that she says Captain Cook came here spreading terror and decimating the population. It's a very fashionable, self-loathing Western view. I can tell she's been educated at the most tip-top universities. But it is totally, totally ignorant, ahistorical. James Cook stayed in Australia at Botany Bay for exactly 1 week, and he killed not one person. In fact, he did his level best to reach out to local Aborigines, writing in his journal, for instance, how he tried again and again to talk to them. He also wrote that he went to their huts and left several articles such as cloth and looking glasses, combs, beads, nails, etc. Cook was a great navigator and a man of science, and anyone who knows anything about him knows he was also humane. But this is an age where facts don't really matter, do they? Emotions matter, politics matter, and history is then replaced with invented memories, politicised memories. A bizarre example now from SBS, which has found a second Aboriginal activist claiming to be descended from a man shot by this terrible James Cook. Last night I introduced you to the first. The ABC interviewed Teresa Adler, who claimed that accounts allegedly in Cook's journal about 2 Aborigines confronted in Botany Bay were wrong. She said, according to the ABC, "I was in high school in year 10 studying Cook, and we were reading a book that said that the bullets were fired over their heads. I remember getting up in my class and saying, 'This is wrong, this is not the true history, because my grandfather was shot.'" As I said last night, her grandfather must have lived for 200 years. But now a second Aboriginal activist has emerged claiming, this time on SBS, also funded by taxpayers, that he too is descended from that man that Cook shot. Well, in fact, Cook actually just stung that man with small shot to stop him throwing spears at him. This activist, RODNEY Kelly, says that he got plenty of bad stories about what happened next.
250 years since that happened is just going to bring back, all those memories and stuff and all those stories about back then. And we think of that day as when it all started, when it began, the loss of culture, loss of language, loss of many tribes.
Loss of culture, but again of these little useful earphones. But don't you love how our taxpayer-funded broadcasters, the ABC and SBS, commemorate our past, James Cook, in the most negative way. Now, who would credit 2 descendants from this guy Cook shot? But how reliable are these stories that Rodney Kelly says are passed down by his ancestors? For instance, he says, one story that's not told in the history book is told by my great-great-grandmother, Queen Emma of La Perouse. She was told by her elders that in 1770, James Cook left casks of dynamite on the shore, rigged to blow up. Wow, that'd have to be a war crime by James Cook. What a shocking thing. But here are 2 big problems with this story. First, of course, dynamite wasn't invented when Cook landed at Botany Bay. It was another 97 years before Arthur Nobel came up with that. And there's no word in Cook's diary of doing any such booby-trapping anywhere with gunpowder or sticks or whatever. He needed on these trips to make friends, not enemies. And his diary is filled with reference to exactly that. In short, the story is rubbish, dynamite. But it does show how unreliable oral traditions are, the ones that historians now really love. The closest, though, to an eyewitness account of Cook from an Aborigine that I can find, the earliest story, is an interview in 1833 that 2 men in Sydney, including the Bishop of Birmingham, did with an Aboriginal man, and which one of them then wrote up in the papers 30 years later. Now, that Aboriginal man in 1833 told these 2 guys he wasn't born when Cook arrived, but he does remember, or he did, what his dad had told him. That was that the Aborigines stayed away from Cook for days, which Cook recalls, but that several of Cook's crew did finally get to meet 2 of the men. Well, Cook doesn't have a reference to that, so who knows. This Aboriginal source says that crew showed every sign of friendship, every sign of friendship. One offered them his jacket. They offered also bread, which the locals didn't like, but a small axe, which they very much did. Very handy. So that's the Aboriginal oral tradition of 1833. No hard feelings about Cook, no dynamite. Seemed like a good bloke. But nearly 200 years on, very different so-called memories, heavily politicised. And now Cook is a figure of terror, a killer, decimating the people. You know, I really despair about the death of reason in this country and the triumph of ignorance.